The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Mary Watts and I'm a senior advisor with the Office of Community Services, currently serving in oversight capacity for the LIHEAP program. And we want to thank you all for coming to this LIHEAP webinar hosted by OCS and presented by Apprise. We're really happy that you're all here. This webinar is about completing the remaining LIHEAP quarterly reports for the federal fiscal year 2026. Next slide. As we said in this announcement, the purpose of this webinar is to review the data elements needed to complete the report and explain any changes made to quarters 3 and quarter 4 reports, as well as review the process for submitting and updating the report, and of course, answer any questions that you may have. You'll see that the audience for this is state, territory, and tribal LIHEAP coordinators, as well as program staff and contractors here to help you with completing the report. Today's webinar is conducted by Apprise, a nonprofit research institute that is contracted with ACF to provide LIHEAP training and technical assistance. The Apprise team works closely with LIHEAP grant recipients and reviews the quarterly reports. Our speakers today will be Dan Bausch, Senior Project Director at Apprise, and Melissa Torgerson, owner of Verve Associates LLC. Dan has 15 years of experience working on the LIHEAP technical assistance, and Melissa is a former LIHEAP state coordinator with detailed experience on LIHEAP reporting. With that, I thank you again for attending, and I will pass this off to Melissa.
Thanks, Mary. Today's webinar will be 60 minutes long. Slides and other resources that you may use as you're putting together your quarterly report are available for download now under the handout section in the GoToWebinar sidebar. Just so that you all know, the webinar is being recorded today and it will be published on the ACF YouTube channel. During the webinar today, at any time, you're encouraged to ask questions as you have them by typing them into the question box. And this is on the sidebar as well. Any questions that you submit will be reviewed and responded to at the end of the webinar. And if it's something that maybe only your state or tribe or territory has a question about, or if we don't have time to get to it, we will answer you via an email after the webinar today. This is an outline of the presentation and it looks long. What we hope that you'll use this for is as you go back and review items we talk about today, this is kind of like a nice index. But as you can see, we're going to talk about what's new, data needed to complete the report, and then we're going to go through the report section by section to provide instructions before giving you some final reminders. Now we're going to ask a poll today. How prepared do you think your team is for correctly completing the LIHEAP quarterly report for quarter 3 of FY2026? And the options today are not at all prepared, a little prepared, mostly prepared, or very prepared. Give this a few seconds. All right. So it looks like the numbers are holding steady. Most of you seem to be prepared, over half of you that responded. Many are very prepared, but there are some of you who are maybe not at all or a little. And so we're hoping that today for all of you, you'll take something away from this that makes you feel a little bit more ready to put together this report. I want to underscore here at this time that we're going to go through a lot of information, and if you can take one thing away, that's great. But we know that you're going to have to put together this report. And as you have questions, we want to encourage you to reach out to any of us to help you answer those questions or help guide you through your data collection or reporting processes. We are here and ready to help. And with that, we're going to go into an overview of this report.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Melissa. I'm Dan Bausch. I'm going to start talking about the LIHEAP quarterly report and why it exists. So the LIHEAP quarterly report provides some really important key information on each individual grant recipient's LIHEAP program. That includes program outcomes, indicators of how your LIHEAP programs are serving eligible households in the specific quarter, and how your funds are being obligated throughout each quarter of the fiscal year. Program impacts, so besides how many households are being served, how many households facing an energy crisis, an emergency, lost energy service, are having that service restored and that crisis averted because of your programs. And how your programs are changing, evolving, and adapting throughout the fiscal year based on the circumstances that are happening on the ground and based on changes you might be making to your programs mid-year or on a quarterly basis. So the report collects indicators for each of these items to tell OCS, to tell you, and to tell the public these important pieces of information. So for just a quick history lesson on the report, this report was initiated in 2022. There were minor changes made in 2023 to reduce some of the reporting requirements, especially for tribal grant recipients. In 2024, after the report was initially available in spreadsheets, it was made available in the online data collection system, or OLDC. And then more recently, for this year, the LIHEAP quarterly report was renewed and approved by OMB through 2029 with approved changes for quarter 3 and quarter 4 of the report. So you all recently submitted your quarter 1 and quarter 2 reports. Today we're going to focus in on the changes that are being made for quarter 3 and quarter 4. So let's talk about how this report fits in with all of the required reports that you have to submit for your LIHEAP programs. The first report you have to submit each year is your LIHEAP model plan. That is a forward-looking report saying, here's what we're planning to do for the upcoming fiscal year. Here are the components we plan to operate and the different criteria we have in place for those components. Then historically, you've had to report different forms that look back at what was accomplished during the prior fiscal year. So some of those are fiscal reports, like your SF425 form, the carryover and reallotment report. Others report on outcomes, like the number of households assisted in the household report. And then for states, you've also had to complete the performance data form that talks about how your uses of funds how your funds were obligated to different uses and your performance measures. The quarterly report is intended to provide more close to real-time information. We talked about different indicators already, but it's providing more detail on the timing of program activity throughout different months of the year. So why is the report being collected? Well, first, it helps track those indicators closer to real time so that OCS, so that you all, so that the public can see when funds are being deployed, when households are being assisted through different seasons of the year. Second, it's demonstrating those activity levels in a way that can be shown and displayed. This information is also used to respond to inquiries about the program, and it can be used by you to help identify if there's any updates that are needed to your model plan to reflect programmatic changes that may have occurred. such as adjustments to your benefit procedures or your adjustment to your program's start and end dates. It's also used to inform where there should be targeted training and technical assistance. So the comments that you write in on the form can be very helpful for identifying if there might be different kinds of assistance available to help you overcome any challenges. And then lastly, it is used to communicate information to the public about LIHEAP, and that's through the LIHEAP data dashboard. So here's what the data dashboard looks like. This is available through OCS. And as your quarterly reports are submitted and reviewed and finalized, the information is made available through this dashboard. All right, so let's talk about what's new for the 2026 reporting cycle. First, if you weren't aware, an action transmittal was published in April about the 2026 quarterly reports. It was published with instructions, and those are included as handouts here, as Melissa mentioned earlier. The quarter 1 and quarter 2 reports were already due at the end of April. The next report due is for quarter 3, and that's due July 30th. The report will need to be submitted in the OLDC system. Quarters 1 and 2 were already submitted there. Quarter 3 is not yet available, but is expected to be available within the next 2 weeks, so this month. OCS will be issuing a communication when that is available for you to go in and fill in. As always, OLDC, to be able to submit the form, you need to make sure that you are the designated person who can validate, certify, and submit the form. So if you have questions about that, we encourage you to reach out to the LIHEAP inbox if you're new to the program, not sure how to get into OLDC, anything like that. Here's the schedule. Again, July 30th is for quarter 3. Quarter 3 is from April 1st to June 30th is the time period. And then the quarter 4 report will be due on October 30th. All right, so let's talk about the changes that have been made to the 2026 report. So quarter 1 and quarter 2 that you already submitted, there were no substantial changes to those reports. Quarter 3 and quarter 4, there are 2 important changes that we want to highlight for you, and we're going to go over in more detail throughout the webinar. Change number 1 is that section 3 in the report, which is about the uses of funds, has been updated to collect the same information that was previously collected in the LIHEAP carryover and reallotment report. So that reallotment report was typically submitted initially in August, and then again at the end of the calendar year in December. That information has now been incorporated into the quarter 3 and quarter 4 reports, with the intention of eliminating the LIHEAP carryover and reallotment report. The second change is that section 3 had previously been optional for tribal grant recipients who received an award of less than $50,000, but that section is now required for all grant recipients. So for this first change, we want to talk about the intention behind it and what it means. So this change was done to simplify the reporting process by reducing the number of separate reports that have to be submitted. And it was also done to provide this information earlier in the fiscal year so that OCS technical staff could assist grant recipients that may need assistance and to help with the issuance of the reallotment funds. So what is now being asked in section 3 is going to mirror the carryover and reallotment report. You're going to be asked for the cumulative actual amount of funds that were obligated at the end of the quarter. So where you are in obligating funds that were awarded for the fiscal year. You're going to be asked for a projected amount of funds that you expect will remain unobligated as of the end of FY2026. So that's a projected amount of how much will be unobligated on September 30th. And then there are fields that are going to ask for your statement or explanation for what you're intending to do with the unobligated funds if you're carrying them over to the next fiscal year, and just provide a statement about why those funds are being reserved and remaining unobligated. So we're going to look at what this looks like a little bit later in the webinar and look at it visually together. So what this means when we step back and look at the big picture of your LIHEAP reports is, again, the carryover and reallotment report being removed, and the LIHEAP quarterly report now being the place where you would provide information on cumulative obligations and the projected amount that will be unobligated at the end of the fiscal year. The second change that this is that Section 3 is required for all grant recipients. This is made to make sure that that critical information that was being submitted by all grant recipients in the carryover and reallotment report continues to be submitted and collected. If you need assistance with tracking your obligations or projecting unobligated balances, or anything with the report, we encourage you to reach out to the Apprise team and also the LIHEAP inbox that's listed here and other places in the webinar. Okay, so we have attached resources to this webinar that we mentioned already, different handouts. One other handout that's there is in this bottom bullet. This is a communication that the OCS and ACF shared on LIHEAP obligations, expenditures, and refunds from August of 2024. So we encourage you, if you have not seen that or looked at it, or are wondering exactly what's considered an obligation or an expenditure, we encourage you to start with that resource. All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to Melissa to talk about the data that's needed to complete the report.
Thanks, Dan. So as you saw from Dan's kind of layout, there are a lot of little pieces of these reports. And so in this section, we're going to talk about the kind of data you should be tracking for each household as you serve them throughout the year. And then in the next section, what we'll do is tell you how to extract pieces of data for each household in order to fill out the report. So let's start with the data you should be collecting. To complete it, you're going to need 4 different kinds of data and information. You're going to need information about assisted households. That's who you served with LIHEAP. You're going to need household energy status information. And this is, we'll go into some more detail, but this is looking at prevention and restoration. Now, this is an optional item for tribal grant recipients who are awarded less than $50,000 in regular non-supplemental LIHEAP. Fiscal data on obligations, and you're also going to need program implementation information. And this is just general information about changes in your program or how you're looking at developing it into the future. So let's look at these. Next slide. Number 1 is assisted household data. So where you're going to get this is from your program records of recipients or households that you're helping. Now this, for some of you, is a system. For some of you, it might be a broken system or a system that's spread out. And for others, you might be using an Excel spreadsheet. Regardless, this is where you're going to track the households that you're helping. And the people that we're going to be focused on are those folks assisted with regular LIHEAP, crisis, and weatherization or equipment services. For the purpose of each quarterly report, you're going to be looking at just the 3-month quarter for this piece of information. So we're going to be looking at all of the households that you serve within the 3-month quarter you're reporting on. And this is an important note that the focus is on households, not the number of benefits issued, because you can issue more than one benefit to a household, and not on household members. We're looking at households. And so this is what this might look like. We've redacted the ID and the primary applicant name, but those are both important. The ID especially because it helps you unduplicate households, which we'll talk about in a bit, and the type of benefit they received and the benefit award date. And this is what it might look like. So this might be, if you have a giant spreadsheet, this would be on the left, right? The very first thing that you're going to track is the award that they got and the type they received. The next piece of information is a household energy status. Now, remember, this isn't required for tribes that are below that $50,000 threshold. That doesn't mean you, for those of you out there who might meet that, that doesn't mean you can't collect this. You absolutely can. It might be helpful for your own program, but you're not required to report it. And you're going to get this information from the intake or the application, and then it will ideally be put into a spreadsheet or a system. And what we're collecting here is the number of households assisted with regular LIHEAP crisis and weatherization who had energy service restored with LIHEAP or imminent loss of service prevented with LIHEAP. Once again, the data time period needed for this is going to be the 3-month quarter. So you're going to report just on the quarter, not a cumulative amount here. And an important note here is the focus is on occurrences versus households. So what this means is that I might be a household who had multiple instances of equipment repair or replacement. You had to go out maybe twice to repair my furnace. And so in that case, we're going to count both occurrences. We're not looking at households this time. Now, if you're going to build onto the spreadsheet that we started in the last section, we have the ID and the name, the benefit type received, and the award date. And now we're going to add in these two columns. Were they disconnected or out of fuel at the time of application? So did LIHEAP potentially restore home energy if they were out of fuel? Or were they past due or almost out of fuel? Maybe they had less than 20% in their tank. In this case, you might say a LIHEAP benefit prevented them from losing home energy. And so you'll want to keep the track of this for each household in your spreadsheet or your system. The third data point you're going to need is fiscal data. And these are fiscal records on obligation of awarded funds. Now, keep in mind, obligation is different than expenditures, and we'll talk about that a few times during this webinar. What we're looking at here for data population, or what we're including, are funds awarded by HHS for LIHEAP for the fiscal year you're reporting on. This one is where we diverge a little bit, because for the first two data points, we're only looking at the quarter in which we're reporting on. But when we get to this data point, we're looking at cumulative numbers. And so for this, we're looking at how much have we obligated to date in FY 2026. Once again, the focus is on obligations, which may differ from expenditures. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more and give you some examples of what that looks like. So here is an example spreadsheet. You're not going to keep track of this on the same as you would a household that we've been looking at. This is where you're going to say we got $5 million in regular awards and we've obligated $4 million of it. And you want to be able to track that throughout the year. Now you can go to the next slide, Dan. And finally, this is program implementation information. This is data point number 4. And this is where you're going to keep track of your own notes, your own documentation of the program throughout the year. And what you're going to be looking at here is any changes to reporting or developments to your program made since the prior LIHEAP quarterly report. This is a narrative section, and I can't tell you enough how valuable this is to OCS. OCS right now is in the process of trimming down reports and taking out anything unnecessary. So the fact that they left this in tells you that this is really important, because they use this to reach out to you and give you ideas and to kind of flag any issues you might be facing and help you problem solve. This is an optional section for those tribal grant recipients at that less than $50,000 threshold. But once again, you're absolutely welcome to fill this out, especially since it will give your liaisons and OCS a chance to see how your program is doing and work with you if you need it. Now, we talked about those 4 pieces of information that you should be collecting: the household you helped, what their account status was, how much of your funds you've obligated already in the year, as well as any kind of changes in your program. And you may be collecting those in different places, but now you're going to sit down to do your report, and you know where all that information is. Might be scattered, but you know where it is. And now let's pull it out to actually fill out your report. We're going to look at these 5 sections, starting with section 1, total households assisted. Now, there's a lot of information on the screen, some of these screens, and we're going to go through it. But once again, you can call us with questions afterwards. So this particular section asks you to report 1 data point. All grant recipients must complete this section, including tribes with less than $50,000. And what you're going to be reporting is a total count of households assisted by LIHEAP during the 3-month quarter. Now, there's some more detailed information here on the next slides. This should include households awarded a benefit during the quarter that was paid in part or full by LIHEAP, and any households who received equipment or weatherization during the quarter that was paid in full or in part with federal LIHEAP. What it shouldn't include are households that were served entirely with other funds, so no LIHEAP was used in their benefit, households who applied but were denied and didn't receive a benefit, households who applied but were not insisted until after the quarter. They'd be counted in the next quarter, whatever quarter they were actually provided assistance in. Households who applied but who were, households who only received a nominal benefit to assist with SNAP eligibility. So some of you do a Heat and Eat program or something like that, and these households should not be counted in the quarterly report. So Dan put together this slide, and I think it's really useful because it's almost like an FAQ. Some key guidance for calculating. You're going to count households, not benefits issued or total household members. So if a household received multiple benefits in the same quarter, you're only going to count the household once. You're not going to count the number of benefits you gave out. And if you need assistance with this, if you have a spreadsheet and you need help unduplicating, this is a perfect example of when to call a prize, because they're very good at helping people through that. And so I'd encourage you to reach out if that's a challenge or you're spending a lot of time on it. Do I count a household in the report if they were counted in a prior quarter? In this section, yes. We're looking at the quarter as a snapshot. So we're saying in this quarter, how many households did we help, regardless of whether they got help in the previous quarter. And then what about LIHEAP weatherization and equipment? We're counting all LIHEAP here. And so if you work with a department that does weatherization or equipment repair and replacement with LIHEAP separate than energy assistance, you're going to need to get information from them on a quarterly basis, fold it in with yours, and then unduplicate it. Once again, this is something that a prize can help with, but you're going to want to count any household that received any kind of LIHEAP in the quarter. Slide. The next slide is what we're calling performance management, and this goes to those account status or service restoration and prevention numbers that we were talking about. So let's take a closer look at this. This section asks you to report on 2 data points. First, it's going to ask you to report the number of times during the quarter, that 3-month period, that a LIHEAP benefit or assistance prevented the loss of home energy service. It's also going to ask you to report the number of times during 3-month quarter that a LIHEAP benefit restored home energy service to a household that had lost their energy. Let's take a closer look at what this means. This should include all instances where a benefit, and we're talking about prevention right now, line 1, all instances where a benefit that was paid in full or part with federal LIHEAP prevented the loss of energy service. It shouldn't include instances where no federal LIHEAP funds were used. Many of you have other sources of energy assistance or weatherization funding. If no LIHEAP was included in the benefit, then that particular instance should not be counted. Instances where LIHEAP was provided to assist households that did not face imminent loss of home energy service. Many of your households are coming in and they're not yet past due, or they're not yet facing an imminent loss of home energy, and that's just fine. And so we're not going to count them in this section. So some examples of these might be households with a disconnection or a shutoff notice who received a LIHEAP benefit that prevented their service from being disconnected. This might be households who are low on delivered fuel. Some people use a percentage of a tank, or how many days left of firewood, for example, and where LIHEAP actually made it possible for them to keep their energy on without ever losing it. And then households who have working but failing equipment that was repaired or replaced with LIHEAP federal funds. These are those furnaces that you can take one look at and you hear them rattling and cranking, making scary noises from the basement, and it's not going to last you much longer. These are those kinds of equipment that we're looking at. So some guidance, we're counting instances here, not households. So once again, as we mentioned, a household really could have multiple repairs in a quarter. And so we're counting the number of times a LIHEAP benefit helped to repair. And so whereas in that data sheet that we looked at earlier, that spreadsheet where we look at households, we're just counting the IDs once, the household IDs. In this case, we're just going down the column of preventions and counting the number of times it says yes. So this is an easier count to compile. An imminent loss of home energy service is to be defined by all of you. And so for some people, we're going to hear that this is a shutoff or disconnect notice. Some people might include past due notices. For others, it may be something like a certain year on their furnace. For example, their furnace is over 20 years old or over X amount. And so they know that it's not going to last longer, or they sense it's not going to last longer. We do have a supplement on determining what you would define as at risk, but the key is for you to define it and then to use it consistently across your spreadsheet so that you know when to check yes and when to check no. For some states, this is going to all fall under their crisis and emergency assistance. But for other states, tribes, and territories, this is going to include services, whether it's regular or crisis. So some people with shutoff notices, for example, are served with a regular benefit. It doesn't necessarily need to be a crisis benefit. So really what we're more interested in here is what is the household status at the time of their benefit, and is the benefit actually preventing loss of home energy? Now we'll go through these next slides a little bit faster because it's very similar, but now we're swapping out prevention with restoration. And this is all instances where a benefit restored energy service to a household that had already lost service. And so what this doesn't include, once again, are places where no LIHEAP funds were used, or instances where people still had energy service. And to go into a little more detail, examples of restoration include households that come in who are already shut off, households without any amount of a delivered fuel who received a LIHEAP fuel payment, and households with non-working or red tagged equipment that had it repaired or replaced with LIHEAP federal funds. Once again, you're going to count instances. It's not common for people to have more than one restoration, a household to have more than one restoration in a quarter, but it's not unheard of. So if they were assisted multiple times, you're going to count all the times they were helped. Once again, this is a situation where you know energy service was lost and you used LIHEAP to make sure it was regained. And we do have a supplement linked here as well to help you define that. And once again, this can happen whether it's a crisis program or your regular program. What matters most is the household status at the time of assistance. I'm going to turn it over to Dan to go through sections 3 and 4.
All right, thank you, Melissa. So now we're moving into section 3. Okay, so this is the section we talked about earlier that has been updated to match closely the carryover and reallotment report. So this section is now mandatory for all grant recipients. It's focused on the obligation or the non-obligation of the awarded funds for FY26. Obligations, it's important, especially if you're new to the LIHEAP program or new to your role, that obligation is a term that has different definitions depending on your local jurisdiction, and obligations are not necessarily the same as expenditures or payments. So some examples of obligations are here. They could be approval letters that get issued to clients. They could be credit lines for vendors, contracts to perform services. And we encourage you to look at the IM again or to reach out to the LIHEAP inbox if you need assistance with policies regarding obligations. So for section 3, we again are focusing just on federal LIHEAP funds awarded during 2026. So no ratepayer funds, other program funds, and it's just funds that were awarded in FY 2026. So what this means is we're going to leave out any prior funds that you carried into FY26 from a past year. And you're going to include both your regular LIHEAP block grant funds for 2026 and the Supplemental Infrastructure and Investment Job Act funds if you receive those for 2026. You're going to be asked to report on obligations, which is the cumulative amount that you have obligated by the end of the specific quarter. So the next quarterly report for quarter 3 is covering, when you report obligations, you're talking about all the obligations you've made with 2026 funds from October 1st to June 30th, which is the end of quarter 3. You're also asked to report a projected estimate or projected amount for how much you expect to have remaining as unobligated on September 30th, 2026. So this is a forward-looking projection. It's not an exact calculation. The purpose here is to understand if you're expecting to carry over funds and if you're expecting that you may have excess funds you can't carry over that may need to be returned to HHS. So for example, if you have 5,000 remaining unobligated right now, you might be expecting you're going to obligate some in July, some in August, and so forth. If you plan to obligate all of it, you would report $0. If you plan to carry over $1,000 to FY27, you would put 1,000 on this line. So it's not exact current amounts, but projections for the unobligated funds. Now, there are several reasons you might have unobligated funds projecting to have them or having them now. One is the timing is under the LIHEAP statute and the block grant nature of the program, you're allowed to obligate your awards over a period of time, not all at once. So you may obligate funds at different points throughout the federal fiscal year. Number two, you can also carry over a portion of those funds to obligate in the next federal fiscal year. We're going to talk about the carryover rules. And then the last reason you may have unobligated funds is there's a barrier or a challenge preventing some funds from being obligated, and you're unable to carry them over because of the carryover rules. So these excess funds get called reallotment funds and must be returned to HHS. So under the LIHEAP statute, you are grant recipients are allowed to optionally choose to carry over funds from one fiscal year to the next fiscal year. The rules for the 2026 funds are that you can carry over up to 10% of your awarded funds to 2027. That means you have to obligate 90% by September 30th, 2026. You can obligate 100%, you can obligate 95%, 96%, but the maximum amount you can carry over is only 10%. Now, regular funds are allowed to be carried over, but the IIJA, the infrastructure funds, are not allowed to be carried over to FY27. And that's because the legislation says those funds won't be available past this September 30th. So the key takeaway is to remember that you should focus on obligating all your 2026 IIJA funds and making sure you're able to obligate 90% of your total 2026 awards by September 30th. If you do have unobligated regular funds above that 10% amount, you're unable to carry them over. Those funds get returned to HHS and then redistributed to grant recipients in the next fiscal year. If you're, again, this is by the end of September, so it's June right now. So if you're facing a challenge, you expect there might be an issue with being able to obligate 90% of your funds, please reach out to OCS and the LIHEAP inbox as soon as possible. There's different ways that grant recipients have worked through those challenges in the past, and they can assist you with that. All right, so let's look at the updates to Section 3 now. So this is what it looked like in your Quarter 1 and Quarter 2 reports. There were two lines. Line 1 was populated for you with your award amounts for regular funds and for the infrastructure funds. And so you're only asked to input two numbers. You're asked to input your amount of obligations, cumulative obligations of regular funds, and you were asked in the second column to report the cumulative amount of IIJA obligations as of the end of the quarter. So that's Quarter 1 and 2, consistent with the past. This is what it's going to look like for Quarter 3 and Quarter 4. Now it does look a little big and a little bit intimidating, but we're going to walk through this together. The first thing I want to highlight is if you're able to see, some of these boxes are grayish color. All the grayish colors are fields you do not have to fill in. The first two fields get pre-populated for you. Those are your award amounts and your carryover, maximum carryover limit. The fields on the bottom that have the orange calculated by OLDC text, those are fields that OLDC fills in for you once you enter lines 3 and lines 4. So the only numbers you need to enter here are on lines 3 and on line 4. So let's look at what this section is going to ask again. It's going to ask for 4 pieces of information: the total cumulative amount of awarded 2026 funds that were obligated as of the end of the quarter. That goes on line 3. You report one number for regular funds and one number for the infrastructure funds. So this is the amount you've obligated as of the end of Quarter 3, which is June 30th. Second piece of information is you're going to report the projected amount you expect will remain unobligated on September 30th. That goes on line 4 in the yellow here. And again, it's one number for regular funds and one number for infrastructure. Next, you have to put an explanation statement for why funds were not obligated. So maybe you're carrying over funds to help you at the start of the next fiscal year. You just have to write a statement explaining that here in box 7. And then lastly, if you are carrying over funds to the next fiscal year to 2027, you're asked to just provide an explanation of how you're planning to use those funds in the next year. And that goes on the bottom in box 8 here. So for this section, you're only filling in boxes 3 and 4 with numbers. And if you have numbers in box 4, you'll fill out the boxes on the bottom here. So let's look at a quick example. Let's say you were awarded $25,000 for 2026. In quarter 1, you obligated 10,000 of those funds. So in the quarter 1 quarterly report, you're going to report 10,000 as the amount obligated at the end of the quarter. And that report wasn't changed, so you do not need to report a projected unobligated amount. There's no line for that in quarter 1. Let's say in quarter 2, you obligated an additional $8,000. Now remember, you're not reporting the amount you obligated within each quarter in the report. You're reporting the cumulative amount, the total as of the last date in that quarter. So for quarter 2's report, you would report 18,000. That's the 10,000 in quarter 1 plus the 8,000 in quarter 2 equals 18,000. Now as we get to quarter 3, you obligated another $4,000 from your 2026 award. So you would report that $4,000, but you also need to project or estimate how much of your funds will remain unobligated at the end of the fiscal year. And let's say you're planning to carry over $2,000 to 2027. You'd put $2,000 on the projected unobligated balance line. So note here, if you do the math, 22,000 for quarter 3 plus 2,000 equals 24,000. Those lines don't have to add up to your award amount. In this case, you projected $2,000. That means you're thinking we're going to obligate another $1,000 during quarter 4. So it's okay if your obligation and your projected unobligated amounts don't add up to your award amount in the report. Now, for the last quarter, you ended up obligating $2,000. That was more than you projected, so you're actually only going to carry over $1,000 to 2027. That means in the quarter 4 report, you're going to add in those $2,000 for a total of $24,000 obligated, and you're going to put your final carryover amount of $1,000. So this is an example. We encourage you to have this and to share this with the fiscal staff who might be helping you with the report. All right, now we're going to look at section 4. That's the implementation and support section. So this asks you questions and has text box for you to write in responses. This is optional for the tribal grant recipients with awards of less than $50,000. There are some differences in the questions that are asked in this section for each quarter. So quarter 1 to 3, you're being asked, have you made changes to any of these items? When the quarter 4 report is due in October, you're going to be asked about the results of the changes you made during the year. And it asks about things like arrearage forgiveness policies, your outreach strategies, your income eligibility criteria. Some require a yes/no answer in addition to the open text box fields. Others are just text box fields. We encourage you to have details just to make sure that you're documenting what you're doing and if any assistance is needed. And now I'll turn it to Melissa for the remarks and for our closing section.
Great. So in section 5, this is a place where you can put any comments to explain items of the report. And so this is going to be places where you'd say, we feel like this field might not be that reliable because we had trouble collecting it this year or this particular quarter. And here's what we're doing to change it. If there are big changes or swings, so for example, Dan gave the instance where they thought that the grantee thought that the carryover into the next year would be $2,000, but it actually ended up being half of that. If you have something like that with big swings, big changes, then or even big changes from the previous year, it's helpful to note this is really your section. It's a good chance not just to alert OCS and Apprise of what they're seeing in the report and the reasons why, but also for your own records to understand why maybe you had a dip in numbers, so that someone who's looking back on 3 or 4 years of data and sees a weird dip or a weird bump in information can say, oh, here's the narrative as to why that happened. So you can take up as much space, I think, as you want with this response, and you should use it liberally. This is a real chance for you to explain what we're looking at when we see your report. Next section. We're going to go into final reminders. So all grant recipients must submit quarterly reports. Quarter 3 is due on July 30th, and quarter 4 is due on October 30th. If you are going to need help completing the report, or you're facing challenges in meeting a due date, or you are facing challenges accessing OLDC, we encourage you to contact the LIHEAP inbox or your OCS program specialist as soon as possible. This is not something to wait on until the report is due. So when you foresee that you might be running into any of these issues, we encourage you to reach out as soon as possible. Next slide, please. So just a reminder, in quarter 1 and 2, there were no changes from previous year. In quarter 3, there are 2 important changes. Section 3 of the report has been updated to collect information about your obligations that was previously collected in the carryover report. And the other change is that while Section 3 was previously optional for grant recipients receiving awards under $50,000, this is now required for all grant recipients. Next slide. I'm not going to go through all of this, but for those of you who might be new or haven't gotten into OLDC in a while, keep in mind that this data must be entered in OLDC. And this requires a process of submitting and certifying. And so when you see this, this is a good reminder for you to go prior to your report being due and try to log in, take a look at the report, make sure you can access it and submit prior to the due date, because this can be something that trips people up. It takes longer than they anticipate. So all the instructions are here. We also have a few slides at the end that we won't go over, but that we'll send out on accessing and using OLDC. Once again, there is a process about saving and validating, certifying and submitting, and certain people in your office will have certain permissions. So this is something that even before your report is done, or maybe even before you've started looking at it, you can get into OLDC and make sure that you understand, first of all, that you can access it, but that you can understand who has what roles and permissions. Next slide. Once you submit your report, OCS and the Apprise team, which includes Lux Consulting, will review the submitted report. We're not reviewing for compliance. We're looking at giving you all help to get it accurate and complete. If we see any issues or have questions, we'll contact you via email, and you should respond in a timely manner. Make sure you hit reply all on the emails so that your questions can be addressed as quickly as possible. These are quarterly report resources. Some of them are already connected to this webinar and the handouts, but we have provided links as well. This includes forms, the action transmittal, a check before you submit document, which will help you go through and make sure you've gotten everything right, as well as a whole page on required reports that gives training and technical assistance resources for you to access. These are your support resources. You'll notice the LIHEAP inbox is at the top there. That's going to go to OCS. Anyone on the Apprise team is also happy to help. We've listed all of our names. That includes Monica from Lux, who works a lot with tribes. So if some of you may be familiar with Monica, you should reach out to any of us. If we can't help, we'll make sure you get in touch with the right person. And with that, let's take a look at this poll. How helpful was this webinar in understanding what's needed to complete the quarterly report? Keep in mind as you're responding to this that we would welcome any suggestions you have for improving this in the future. And once again, this was an overview, a very quick overview. So hopefully you were able to learn something. But if you are left with some additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us because we will be happy to help you through that. All right, it's looking like many of you thought it was very, some of you thought it was somewhat. If you are one of those people who thought it was not at all or not too helpful, please reach out. We're happy to give you one-on-one assistance and walk you through getting this report completed. I'm going to hand it now over to the Apprise team, who's going to monitor and facilitate Q&A.
Okay. So we have a few minutes here. We did get some questions. Thank you for putting some in the chat. First, the slides. If you're looking for the slides, they're here as a handout. This was recorded, so it's also going to get posted and made available on the performance management website and the LIHEAP training page. So that'll be coming up in a few weeks. But if you can't find the slides or you need them emailed, just reach out to us. In terms of a template for the quarterly report, we will check on a template for quarter 3 and quarter 4 with these updates. I believe there is one, so we will look into that if you asked about that. Let's see. Okay, so someone asked about obligations. I think it was the slide that gave different examples of what an obligation is. Maybe Melissa, you can chime in here. One of the examples is credit lines with vendors as an example. And I think that's saying that there's a formalized agreement relationship with vendors that involves payment to them for services, and that some will use that as an example of a formalized obligation. Is that what you're getting from that line?
Yeah, and some people might use the term encumbered. So the idea that those funds are committed in a contract or in a credit line. Here's the key takeaway from that. You should have a written definition of what obligation means in your state, tribe, or territory, and then use that consistently. So if a credit line to a particular vendor is something you want to be considered an obligation, you need to make sure that aligns with what your state, tribe, or territory is already doing in other programs, similar programs, and then make sure it's documented as an acceptable obligation.
Yep. So there was a question about the IIJ funds. So as we mentioned in the webinar, the IIJ funds are not going to be able to be carried over. If you have questions about the use of those funds past this year, we encourage you to reach out to the LIHEAP inbox about them, as OCS is working to answer those kinds of questions right now. Someone asked about the carryover and reallotment report. Yes, the purpose of moving the carryover and reallotment report into Section 3 of the quarterly report was to eliminate the carryover and reallotment report. So that report is being eliminated. and you will not need to submit that in OLDC because that information is being reported in the quarterly report. I think that covers all the questions that were submitted. If you have other questions, reach out to us. As always, we very much appreciate you spending an hour with us to look at this report, and we look forward to the next time we speak to you. Any last words, Melissa?
Oh, just thank you.
All right, thank you. Have a great day.